Hello and welcome to the video assignment for Concept Assignment 9. For the remainder of the semester, we'll be talking about SQL and how to do the commands for actually creating a database using just the commands, the SQL commands, how to insert data into those tables that you create, and then how to do queries. And so with this assignment 9, we're just going to talk about the basics. Be sure and watch this video. Tell your classmates to be sure and watch this video. The assignment is due on Friday, November 22nd. However, you have a grace period until that Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Also keep in mind that you need to do this assignment or you won't be able to do the next assignment which builds upon this assignment. Within your weekly assignment folder, you will have 3 PDF documents. These are outlines and they will provide you what to do in order to do the create, insert, and select statements within SQL. Another thing to keep in mind is that you need to create all the assignments in the order in which they're given here. That is, the first thing you got to do is build the structure of your database. You do that by using the data definition language, and that's just a set of specific commands that allow you to build that database or tables within the database. Then once the tables are built, you need to insert the data. Again, you're going to use a different category of SQL commands, and these are called data manipulation language commands, specifically the insert command. Then once you've got the data in, we can now start to do queries. And just for this week, we're just going to do queries 1 through query 3a. When you save your queries, you're going to need to just name them the same name as the query number. Now for the tables, I'll see the tables that when you created, they'll be there listed on the left-hand side under objects, and then we'll know that you did the correct data manipulation by inserting the data by the queries if you're getting the queries correct or not. Once you've done all these 3 steps in this order, then I want you to upload your Access database to the Concept Assignment 9 link that's in the week 13 of the Blackboard. So I've opened up the first document that you'll find in your weekly assignments for this Concept Assignment number 9. And the first thing we need to talk about is the SQL data definition language. So some key takeaways from this video lecture is we're going to describe what SQL is, the different categories of commands for SQL, the different SQL data types, and then finally using SQL to create tables. So what is SQL? SQL, pronounced like I've been saying it, is structured query language. And so you can use SQL to create databases. Once they're created, then you can add data using this insert command here. You can also delete data using delete command, and you can also change data or records within your database. You can also, once that structure of that database is done, you can also add, modify, and delete that database structure. What that means is you're talking about your tables. So you can either add additional fields to a table or modify that, changing the names, or you can actually delete tables and so on. So keep in mind the structure is the first thing you got to do. Then once you get the structure built, then you can insert your data. Then once the data's in there, then you can start querying the database, or as you see here, the data retrieval. So if you go to work using a database, you're going to see a lot of different SQL languages. And so, but they basically follow the same outline or the same structure of commands as you see here. And so there's little variations, but for the most part, everything we'll be talking about here should be applied across different types of relational databases. The different structures or categories of commands is the data definition language, how you define your tables. Then the data manipulation language, how you insert data into those tables and manipulate that and also do some queries. There's also some data control language, and there's also transaction control language. And they have a different set of commands for each. The data definition language, abbreviated as DDL, is used to create and modify structures of the database. So some key SQL commands would be create, to create the table, alter, to alter the table structure, and then drop is what you use in order to delete the table. Now, we'll have some examples of this later on, but these are just the main SQL commands, and then you got to specify some additional information to the right of those commands. Then in terms of data manipulation language, these are used to insert, modify, delete, and also retrieve your data or your queries, if you will. So a lot of times when you need to add data into the table structure that you created in the previous set of commands, you would use the keywords insert into, and then you have to specify some additional information. If you need to change data, the keyword is update. If you need to delete data, it's delete. And then to run a basic query, you need select. And so that's how you select the fields that you're going to be using. Then stuff we're not going to talk too much about is the data control language used for data access control. So this is where, if it was available to you, you could specify what users and groups would have access to certain tables or even certain fields within that table. Then there's transaction control languages, and that's for managing how those transactions in the database take place. And that's probably not what we're going to get into. So if you can do the first two sets, then that's what I want you to get out of this class. The next thing we need to talk about is the SQL data types. And so these are the data types that are very similar to the ones that when we were in Access and we were modifying or even building the tables, you would select the data type. So in SQL, these are what we have available to us. And these are keywords, again, that you would have to specify in part of your commands. We'll show you how to do that shortly. So char and then n, where you would put in a number, is a fixed length and character string. That means every field would have that width for if it was a fixed character. You can also make it variable length using the keywords variable character. If it's a number and you need to make it an integer, it's typically int. If it's not an integer and you need it to be something else, you can specify as numeric x comma y, where x is the digits and y is the number of decimal points. This is like a fixed variable type, but yeah, in SQL you use numeric. And you can also specify a date, and you have to provide the date in this format. Keep in mind the SQL type that Access uses, you can't specify the digits x and the decimal point y for numeric. Some additional things you need to understand about SQL syntax. And syntax is like the grammar of the language. One thing is that you have to have a semicolon at the end of each SQL statement. And so when the computer is reading that, that indicates that's the end of the SQL command. If you're using it in a list of statements, then the semicolon indicates where the SQL statement ends, and you'll see examples here shortly. Another thing to keep in mind is that SQL commands or keywords are not case sensitive. So, for example, all caps select are the same as if you'd spelled select this way. But you want to try and be consistent to make your data easy to read, especially if you have to go back and modify it. And that also relates to this last statement here, is that you could write all your SQL statements out on one long continuous line. However, if you will break them down then into multiple lines, it makes it easier to edit and make changes and find changes. Okay, the next item I'm going to talk about is using SQL to create tables. So the command is create table, and then you would give it a name. So this is how you would create those relational tables. We'll show you how to join those later on. Please keep in mind, read this a couple of times, that in Access you can only create one SQL statement at a time. So once you've entered the semicolon, you run the statement, then you delete the statement, and then then start again, type in the next statement, and so on. So what you're getting then is, in Access, SQL is not designed to be robust as other relational database management systems. So like if you were to take another class that had MySQL in it, you could put in all your commands at once and then run them all at once. In Access, that's not the case. So what they've done in Access is they've used the wizards and macros and the design and layout views in order to help you do your SQL creation. So up until now, we've been using mostly the query by example panels within Access in order to do our queries. Now I'm showing you how to do everything from start to finish almost using SQL. So here's the database that we're going to build. It's a product sales database. So a customer does a sales transaction. We can determine what store that it's in, what product is being bought. Then we get more specific information on the product. We would know who the vendor was for the product, what category ID it was in. We could also know from what store it was in to what region it was in. So we need to use SQL now to create all of this structure before we can put any data in. So like I said, the key command is create table, then you give it the name, open parentheses, the field name, the data type, whether it's, and then some additional information like you've got here, not null, meaning it's required. And then we can also specify, and we need to specify, what the primary key is going to be. Then since it's open with the open parentheses, we need to close it, and then we do semicolon. So let's go ahead and start our database, and I'll give you some naming convention as well. So I'm going to click Access 2016. We're going to do a blank database, create, and so you see that nothing's there, right? We're going to have to name this later on. I don't want to be named database 5. I'll name it something else. Let me get out of this and just try that again. So instead of this, what I want to call this is your name. That's how I want you to name it. And this is for concept 9. So that's the name of our database. Now, in order to get to our SQL commands and I'll have directions up there for you as well on this. As you go to create, you go to query design, you'll close this, and then you'll go to view and then SQL view. So when you're in SQL view, it automatically puts the first select in there because it thinks you're going to do a query, but that's not what we're going to do. I'm also going to delete this table 1 because I don't need that. And it's not going to, there we go, since I didn't put anything in there. So now I'm ready to type in my query commands, or SQL commands rather. So I literally typed in the commands that we had on the previous screen. Let me get that up for you. So I typed in all of this, and what you get is this. And so if we're in the create mode, I shouldn't say that, click on the design tab, then we're in that query view again. We're now ready to run it. Notice there's nothing over here right now. And so if everything goes well, it should create this. If we were to open this up in design view, you can see vendor ID, vendor name. The default here was short text. Go back to our query. Notice, so short text, even though we said character here, we said 2, and then for vendor name was variable character. So we're using those same data types for these names here. So the syntax is the field name, the data type, and then whether it's not null or not. And so we need to do the same thing for the rest of our structure. And just go through here. That works the same way. Again, we got numeric here for product price. And see how all this could have been typed out on one line, but we broke it down into separate lines. It just makes it easier to read, and if we need to make changes, then we can do that. Also, I want to point out that after each field specification, you got the field name, the data type, not null, or meaning required, and then you have a comma. So that a comma separates each field, and at the end of your SQL statement, you put the semicolon. Notice here in this particular table, we've got a primary key of product ID, but we're using a foreign key, vendor ID, and what it acts as a foreign key for. So it references a table called vendor and the field name vendor ID in that table. Vendor table needs to be created before this table, or you're going to get an error because this won't exist. Notice that another foreign key, category ID, references the table category and the field within that, so on. We get all this information from this structure here. So we just spent almost an entire semester discussing how to go out and be an analyst and figure out what needs to go in our database. Eventually, this is the end result of all of those discussions, all of those surveys, all of that information gathering, so that we can start building that table structure. Nothing new there. Same thing for primary key, foreign key again. Notice the syntax. It doesn't matter if it's uppercase or lowercase, but for primary key and foreign key, we made them all uppercase. Just makes it easier to spot and identify. So nothing there. And so using this document, do build all the tables that I just did, and that'll be one portion of the assignment and part of the database that I'm looking for. Once you're done with that, we'll move on to the next part of the assignment.